We humans have a tendency to take for granted everything that we have. We are surrounded by different kinds of printed materials that come to us in various forms like book, newspapers, journals, magazines, pamphlets, advertisements. And we often assume that things have been like this since times immemorial. We do not think of a world when printing technology did not exist. But do we ever question the history of printing technology? As in how and when printing technology evolved, as in the processes that printing technology underwent in order to become what it is today? Well, this lesson will be devoted to addressing these questions. We will begin this discussion by talking about how printing technology came into being in ancient China. And in our subsequent lessons, we will be focusing on the evolution of the printing technology. So, let us now begin this very fascinating discussion on the evolution of print culture. Now, if we are to trace the origin and history of printing technology, we will be taken to the East Asian countries like China, Japan and Korea, because these were the places where printing technology developed and evolved for the first time. Now let us talk about how printing technology very specifically came into being in China. 594 CE onwards, books were printed in China by rubbing paper against wood blocks, and this process came to be known as the woodblock printing technique. What do we understand by this woodblock printing technique? Now look at this image closely for your reference. What do you see here? This is a block of wood on which certain sentences are engraved. And in this process of woodblock technique, these wood blocks are first dyed with ink. In this process, firstly, these wood blocks are dyed with ink, on which damp paper is pasted. And in the process of this, the ink transfers these writings or these engravings on the paper. So this is the way in which woodblock printing came into being 594 CE onwards in China. And woodblock printing is the first printing technique to have ever evolved in the world. Now when we talk about woodblock printing, doesn't this process sound somewhat similar to you? Well, let us now try to find out why this process sounds similar to you. But before learning about that, let me ask you a question. In which of these techniques were books printed in China 594 CE onwards? Were the books printed in mechanical printing technique, surface printing technique, woodblock printing technique or screen printing technique? Well, the correct answer is woodblock printing technique. This woodblock printing technique is one of the first and earliest printing techniques in which books were printed in China. Now, if you look at these images, you will be able to understand why this process of woodblock printing sounds similar and familiar to you. This is because these are modern day stamps, and the usage of modern day stamps also resemble the process of woodblock technique. Because here we have these stamps on which different writings, logos, symbols are engraved. And then these stamps are dyed with ink in order to paint or stamp these impressions on paper or on different surfaces. So the woodblock printing technique that we talked about as the first printing technique to have evolved in China bears resemblance with the process of stamping that we see in today's world. Now I am sure many of you know the name of this musical instrument. Well, it is an accordion, and in an accordion the bellows are either compressed or stretched in order to produce music, and while these bellows are compressed or stretched, these keys are pressed by the accordionist. But I'm sure you are questioning why we are suddenly talking about a musical instrument in this discussion on printing techniques. Well, this is because accordion bears resemblance with one of the printed materials that was found in ancient China. Doesn't this sound very interesting to you? Because a printed material resembled a musical instrument. Well, let us now find out more about this printed material that was found in ancient China. Well, the printed material that we are referring to is the traditional Chinese accordion book. Now, in this traditional Chinese accordion book, the sides were stitched, and these books could not be printed on both the sides. What do you think is the reason behind this? This is because the pages were not of very good quality, and when one side of the page used to be printed, it left impressions on the other side as well, which is why the Chinese accordion book was printed only on one side. Now, this Chinese accordion book has a very special characteristic. That is to say, these are not separate pages of the book. Instead, it is a one long page which is folded in order to give it an accordion-like structure, which is why it is known as the Chinese accordion book. Now, this Chinese accordion book was folded and printed in this kind of a way so that it could be placed erect, and so that the readers or the viewers could see the contents of all the pages simultaneously. Now, the Chinese accordion book is also very old, and it bears a very rich legacy of Chinese printing techniques. Now, having talked about how print evolved in China, let us now talk about how China controlled the production of printed materials. Now, when it is just one country or one group of people that has sole access to something, invariably that country or that group of people would exercise their monopoly over that thing. Likewise, for a very long time, the imperial state of China exercised monopoly over the production of printed materials. That is to say, it was only the imperial state of China that was producing printed materials through woodblock printing and few other techniques. Now, this printing technology also underwent changes and evolution in China itself. No technology is ever static. It will always be in a state of transition, in a state of development. Now, what do you think contributed to the growth of printing technology in China? Well, it were a set of examinations. Now, doesn't this sound very strange to you? That certain examinations contributed to the growth of printing technology in China? Well, this is because the imperial state of China conducted civil service examinations in order to recruit the bureaucrats. And now, if you have an exam to take, what will you do? You will most definitely study your books that contain all the lessons. And likewise, these people who were appearing for the civil service examinations also had to study many books, which is why the imperial state of China now started sponsoring the large-scale production of printed books. And this large-scale production of textbooks in turn facilitated the growth of printing culture in China. Now, over the years, the number of candidates also started surging, because more and more people were taking the civil service examinations in imperial China, which is why more and more books were required for these candidates for the purpose of studying. And so, more and more books now started to be printed. So, this is a way in which the surge of the number of candidates for an exam actually facilitated the growth of printing culture in China. Now, when we talk about civil service examinations and the candidates studying the printed textbooks, we can understand that till that point of time, books were restricted only for the professionals and the scholars. because normal people were not reading books which were meant for the candidates appearing for the civil service examinations. But over time, this trend now gave way to something new. By the 17th century, printed materials in China ceased to remain restricted to the scholars and officials solely, because over time the masses apart from the scholars and officials also started reading books. Now over time, many cities and towns began springing up in China, and a blooming urban culture was also coming to being. And by this urban culture's growth, we can understand why the use of print now diversified in China. So earlier on, it were only those officials or those scholars who needed to prepare for the civil service examinations were the ones who read the printed textbooks. But because a growing urban culture was now coming into being, that print now diversified and different kinds of printed materials were now being printed in China. Now around this time, merchants also started using printed materials in order to record informations pertaining to their trade activities. So from this we can understand how the usage of print was now in a state of transition in China. Now when we talk about a blooming urban culture, we invariably mean that there was a new reading public. Now what was this new reading public fond of reading? As in, what kind of texts did these people read? Most definitely these people were not the ones who used to read printed textbooks. Instead, they were very fond of reading fictional narratives, poetry, autobiographies, anthologies of different literary masterpieces, as well as romantic plays. All these different kinds of fictional things now grabbed the interest of the new reading public. So this is a way in which print diversified in China. Now over the years, people were slowly gaining access to education. People were slowly gaining access to knowledge that was printed in the books. And women were no exceptions, because women of a certain class were also able to read the books. And rich women in China now took to the habit of reading, because different kinds of printed materials were now coming to being, as we just discussed, and rich women were fond of reading these kinds of fictional narratives. And at the same time, they were also publishing their own poetry. So we can understand how from a nascent stage of woodblock printing that happened in China 594 CE onwards, this process of printing now gave birth to so many new things in the country. Firstly, printing technology developed holding hands with the civil service examinations, and then it gave birth to a new reading culture, and so a new artistic culture also came into being in China. Now by the 18th and the 19th century, the European colonizers had established themselves in different parts of the world, and China was also no exception, because by the late 19th century, the Western powers had established their outposts in China. Now what was the result of this? As a result of the establishment of the Western powers outposts in China, Western printing techniques and mechanical presses now made their way to China. So the ancient woodblock printing technique was now slowly being supplanted by these Western printing techniques as well as the mechanical presses. Now what these Western printing techniques and mechanical presses were will be something that we will be focusing on in one of our subsequent lessons. In today's world, Shanghai is the largest industrial capital in China. It's a hub of trade activities. So many offices and business firms are there in China. And when the Western powers were establishing their outposts in China, Shanghai emerged as the locus of the new print culture. So Shanghai now gained prominence and popularity as the site of the new printing culture following the establishment of the Western powers' outposts in China. So over time, when the Western influence strengthened itself in China, the traditional hand printing now transitioned to mechanical printing in China. So earlier on, it was traditional hand printing or woodblock printing that was prevalent in China, and over time with Western influence, this now transitioned to and gave way to mechanical printing. Mechanical printing uses different kinds of technologies as well as machines to produce more and more printed copies in a very short span of time. In our subsequent lesson, we will focus on how printing technology developed in another East Asian nation, which is Japan. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.